I stood there, gripping the edge of the bank manager's desk, my hands trembling. Not from age, but rage. My voice was calm when I spoke, but my heart was thundering. "Check the footage," I told him. "Look at the signature." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, and then paused. "Wait, Mrs. Caldwell? You taught me U.S. history in '98. You said I had potential." That was the moment everything shifted. My name is Patricia Caldwell, and I am 79 years old. Once upon a time, I commanded a room full of teenagers with nothing but a chalkboard and my voice. I taught American history in the same small-town high school for over 30 years. I've seen the eyes of 100 restless seniors glaze over at the mention of the Civil War, until I told them about the letters soldiers wrote home. I always believed in teaching people to care by showing them the human cost of things. That's probably why it hurts so deeply now, because I thought I'd raised my family to care. I don't have many extravagances. My home is simple: white siding, red shutters, a porch swing that creaks when the wind blows. I make my own tea blends. I keep my pantry labeled. I pay my bills on time. I save, because I grew up knowing that money doesn't grow back once it's gone. And then, it was gone. I had slipped in the garden and fractured my wrist. Just a few days in the hospital, nothing too serious. But when I came home, I noticed the checkbook was thinner. My balance was lower. And then the call came from the bank. "Mrs. Caldwell, you withdrew $52,000 last Friday, in person?" I had not, but someone had. And whoever it was had looked just enough like me and signed my name just closely enough that the teller hadn't questioned it. And the person who did it? The person I thought I could trust with the key to my front door? She looked me in the eye and said, "You're just confused, Grandma. Maybe it was a bank error. Are you sure you're remembering things right? I've read about betrayal. I've taught lessons about it. But I never expected the test to come from someone whose macaroni art still hangs on my fridge." Before everything fell apart, my days followed a rhythm. Gentle, predictable, and mine. I would rise at 7, make a pot of black tea, and sit by the window to watch the sun melt across the azaleas. It was a slow life, but not a lonely one. I had neighbors who waved when they passed by, the mailman who liked to talk about the weather, and a weekly phone call from my son, Michael. After my husband Robert passed, 10 years ago now, I found solace in routine. I kept his recliner exactly where it had always been, though I never sat in it. The books on his shelf remained untouched. I dusted them weekly. I still use the Pyrex casserole dish we received at our wedding. It's scratched and worn, but it's held together better than most things. My world was small but meaningful. I donated time at the library, helped out at the church rummage sales, and sent birthday cards to former students who kept in touch. My granddaughter Emily was one of the bright spots. She had her mother's laugh and her father's sharpness. She'd stop by for lunch sometimes, showing me photos on her phone, talking about work, or sometimes nothing at all. There was peace in the quiet, in folding towels warm from the dryer, in baking zucchini bread, even when no one visited, in reading paperbacks I'd bought for 50 cents from the church bin. I knew the corners of my house like a well-worn novel, and I kept it clean, organized, safe. So when the first tremors came, missed calls, odd glances, mail that didn't quite add up, I didn't notice. Or maybe I did, but I gave grace. Because when your life is built on trusting the people you love, suspicion feels like betrayal in itself. And I wasn't ready to believe that someone I loved could hold a match to the life I'd spent decades building just to see how fast it would burn. The first signs came like gentle knocks on a locked door, soft enough to ignore, but insistent enough to return. Emily began visiting less, though she always had a reason. "Work's been crazy, Grandma," she'd say, brushing my concerns aside with a tired smile. I believed her. Of course I did. Young people had their own lives. I told myself I was being old-fashioned for expecting regular Sunday lunches. Then she started borrowing things, little things at first. A lamp from the guest room she said she needed for her new apartment. An old tablet I no longer used. Just until I get paid again, she'd promise. I always said yes. That's what grandmothers do. It wasn't until I tried to reorder one of my prescription refills that I felt the first real jolt. The pharmacy told me the card on file had been declined. That's not possible, I told them. I'd just deposited my pension check the week before. I hung up and called the bank. Oh, it must be a system delay, the young voice on the other end said. These things happen. Still, something tugged at me. A few days later, I noticed Emily had stopped making eye contact when we spoke. She'd fiddle with her phone more than usual. She asked if I'd ever thought about moving to a retirement community. Someplace with more support, she said, so you don't have to worry about the house. It stung more than I let on. This house was my history. Robert painted the hallway himself. My son took his prom photos on the front steps. Every doorknob had a memory. And yet, I began to question myself. Maybe she was just being practical. Maybe I was being too sensitive. I had always prided myself on being clear-headed, level. But there's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from feeling like the world you trust is shifting beneath your feet, and you're the last one to notice. It started small, little doubts sewn like threads through the fabric of my memory. At first, I thought it was just me misplacing things. A book I swore I left on the coffee table wound up under the couch. My reading glasses vanished, then reappeared in the freezer. I laughed it off. Senior moment, I said aloud to the empty kitchen. But then Emily began pointing them out too. Grandma, you told me we were having lunch tomorrow, not today, she'd say, her brows furrowed with just enough concern to make me pause. Are you sure you didn't already pay that bill? It was on the counter last week. You already told me this story, twice. Each time, I'd second-guess myself. I began writing reminders on Post-it notes, sticking them to the fridge and the bathroom mirror. I kept a little notebook in my purse to track conversations. Still, I felt like I was slipping, like my own thoughts were becoming unreliable. One morning, I noticed that 2 checks were missing from my checkbook. I flipped through it 3 times. I always logged them. Always. I asked Emily about it. Maybe you used them and forgot, she said gently, tilting her head. Do you want me to help go through your accounts? That moment, her offer, her tone, felt like a wall closing in. I heard the pity in her voice, the quiet suggestion that maybe I couldn't manage anymore. But I wasn't confused. I wasn't forgetting. I just didn't have proof. Michael called me that evening. Emily had mentioned her worries to him. Mom, he said, maybe we should consider getting you someone to help. Just a few hours a week. Help? From whom? And for what? I hung up the phone and sat in Robert's recliner for the first time in 10 years. Not because I missed him, though I did, but because I needed to feel anchored in something that still felt real. The final lie wasn't shouted. It didn't come wrapped in confrontation or slammed doors. It came softly, the way fog settles over a field, stealing the edges of things. Emily arrived that Wednesday afternoon with a bag of groceries and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thought I'd cook for you, she said. You've been through so much lately. She made chicken soup, humming tunelessly in the kitchen. I sat at the table, hands folded, watching her stir the pot as if it were any other day. But something gnawed at me, something I couldn't quite name. She was overly sweet. She kept glancing at her phone, biting her lip. After lunch, she offered to clean out the old filing cabinet in the hallway. You keep so much paper, Grandma. Let me help you get organized. I told her I'd already started sorting it myself, but she insisted. I went to lie down for a bit, and when I came back, the cabinet was locked. I thought it was always like that, she said, blinking innocently. That night, I checked again. The cabinet was locked, and the spare key, which I kept in the second drawer of my desk, was gone. The next morning, I found a manila envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a note from Emily. "Thought you might need this. It's your financial summary from the bank. I picked it up for you. Love you." I opened it. There was a balance sheet. One line was circled in blue ink. Withdrawal, $52,000. The date was last Friday, and underneath, in handwriting that mimicked mine almost perfectly, was my signature. My stomach turned. I called Emily. She didn't answer. When she finally called back that evening, she sounded hurt. "Grandma, what are you talking about? Maybe you just forgot. I was with you last Friday, remember? You asked me to go to the bank with you. You said you wanted to make a large withdrawal." "I never said that. I would never—" "I think you're getting confused again. It's okay. I understand." I stared at the phone long after she hung up. My hands were shaking. This wasn't confusion. This was theft. And it had my name on it. The real cruelty didn't come from the missing money. It came the next morning, when I went to the bank myself. I wore a wool coat, even though it was too warm for one, and clutched my purse the way my mother once did, close to the chest, like it could anchor me. The branch looked the same as it always had. Brick walls, clean glass doors, soft instrumental music playing from unseen speakers. But when I walked in, something felt different. I felt small. The teller gave me a rehearsed smile. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" I told her I needed to speak to the branch manager. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply said I had a concern about a large withdrawal. My voice cracked only once. She typed something into her computer, then led me to an office in the back. A young man stood when I entered. Neatly dressed, polite, maybe mid-30s. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Kevin Chen. I just started managing this branch 2 weeks ago. How can I help?" I opened the manila envelope and placed it on his desk. "I didn't make that withdrawal," I said. "That's not my signature." He leaned forward, scanning the paper. Then his eyes flicked up to me. "Wait," he said softly. "Mrs. Caldwell? Patricia Caldwell? You taught at Jefferson High?" I blinked. "Yes." He smiled. Not the kind that's part of a job, but the kind that remembers. "You gave me a B- in U.S. history my junior year. You told me I had potential." I stared at him. "Kevin Chen," I murmured. "You were the one who always wrote your essays in green ink?" He nodded. "I never forgot that," he said. Then he tapped the paper gently. "And I don't believe for a second that this is your signature." In that moment, after weeks of gaslighting, doubt, and isolation, someone finally saw me, really saw me. It was the first time I exhaled in days. But the relief was short-lived, because what Kevin uncovered next would be worse than I imagined. Emily hadn't just taken the money. She had left behind a trail of evidence that suggested I'd given it to her willingly, and that I was no longer mentally competent to control my own finances. She hadn't stolen from me. She had erased me. When I stepped back outside the bank, the world felt too bright. The sunlight hit the sidewalk in sharp, cruel angles. My coat clung too tightly to my shoulders, and my legs didn't feel like they belonged to me. I stood there for a long time, blinking, the manila envelope clutched to my chest like a shield. Kevin had promised to look into everything. He would pull camera footage, compare signatures, check timestamps. His voice was calm and measured, but I saw the worry behind his eyes. It wasn't just about the money. It was about what the forgery implied, about what it had been designed to prove, that I was no longer fit to manage my own life. I didn't go home right away. I walked. Just walked. Past the post office, the park, the library where I used to volunteer. I looked at the faces of strangers and wondered how many of them had stories like mine, quietly bleeding beneath polite smiles. When I finally reached my front steps, my keys trembled in the lock. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. My floral teacups stacked neatly, the Afghan folded on the couch, Robert's recliner untouched, and yet it all felt foreign, like I was walking through a replica of my life. I made tea. I sat at the table and stared at the steam rising from the mug. Then I opened my checkbook. 3 more checks were missing. There was no denying it now. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a single lapse in judgment. This was a plan. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. "Hope your appointment went well. Let me know if you need anything." I stared at the screen. I didn't reply. For the first time, I realized that love, real love, doesn't ask you to vanish piece by piece for someone else's gain. And I had been vanishing for months. I didn't open the curtains the next morning. The sunlight felt like a trespass, an intrusion I hadn't invited. The kettle boiled and shut off on its own. I didn't make tea. I didn't eat. I sat in Robert's recliner and stared at the spot on the wall where we used to hang our anniversary photos. I'd taken them down last spring when the frame cracked, told myself I'd replace it. I never did. The hours slipped by, shapeless. My hands curled in my lap like they didn't know what to do without a lesson plan or a crossword puzzle to fill. What haunted me most wasn't the money. It was the betrayal. The ease with which Emily had slipped into this performance. The sweetness in her voice as she stole from me. The casual dismissal when I questioned anything. I thought of the girl who used to fall asleep in my lap during thunderstorms. The girl who cried when her goldfish died. I had sewn her Halloween costumes. I had driven her to ballet. I had clapped for every crooked drawing she ever stuck to my fridge. Had she been pretending all along? Or had I failed her somehow, raised her without the spine of empathy she needed to become a good woman? The questions circled endlessly. I started to doubt my own instincts. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I did sign something, somewhere, sometime. What if she was right? What if I was slipping? But then I remembered Kevin's face, the firm line of his jaw, the certainty in his voice. He hadn't wavered, not for a second. "She erased you," he said, "but she didn't succeed." And that became my anchor. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't confused. I was grieving a granddaughter who still existed, but not as the person I loved. In the days that followed, I began cutting back, not because I had to yet, but because I knew it was coming. I canceled my weekly grocery delivery and started taking the bus to the market. I stopped buying the good honey I liked and swapped it for store brand. No more lavender lotion, no more fresh flowers, no more donations to the library fund. Every dollar now had a question mark beside it. I dug through file cabinets, looking for old statements, receipts, any proof that could help Kevin. I found a canceled check from 2 years ago, my handwriting unmistakable, round, steady, deliberate. I compared it to the forged signature from the withdrawal. The difference was obvious. But to someone who didn't know me, who wanted not to know. I met with Kevin again that Thursday. He had already pulled the security footage. The woman on the tape wore a mask. COVID rules still lingered in banks. But her gait, her voice, the slight hunch of her shoulders, it was Emily. I knew it the moment she stepped into frame. Kevin slowed the video, paused it. "She brought a folder," he said quietly. "She had your identification, Patricia. A power of attorney document. Not official, but it looked close enough to pass." My heart broke all over again. To forge a check is one thing, to plan for it, to create a false narrative of control, of helplessness, that was something else entirely. "I'll keep digging," Kevin said. "But we need to be careful. If she filed anything else, guardianship paperwork, financial access claims, we need to get ahead of it." I nodded. I didn't have the words. That night, I pulled a blanket over my lap and lit the old reading lamp in the corner. I went over every expense, every asset. I began building a list of what I still had and what I was willing to lose, because the war had started, and I wasn't going to lose it quietly. I had to let go of the idea that this could be fixed quietly. At first, I resisted the thought of going to the police, not because I didn't believe in justice. I taught civics for 20 years. But because I couldn't bear the thought of watching my granddaughter's name enter a system that might devour her. What if she was scared? What if she panicked and spiraled further? What if she ruined herself entirely? But then I thought about what she had already done. She hadn't just stolen money. She had planted a narrative that I was old, unstable, and unable to handle my affairs. She had created fake paperwork. She had walked into a bank and pretended to be my voice. She wasn't afraid. She was prepared. I sat in my bedroom that evening with the windows cracked open, listening to the wind chime on the porch. I held a photograph of Emily at age 6, missing front teeth, holding a popsicle, her cheeks sticky with joy. I traced her face with my thumb. Then I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. His name was Thomas McGill, a quiet man with a kind heart who handled Robert's will and my modest estate. I told him everything. I didn't cry until I said the words. She pretended I was slipping. There was a pause on the line. Then softly he said, "Patricia, if she's willing to do that now, it won't stop here. You're doing the right thing." We met the next day. Kevin had already sent me a flash drive with everything he'd gathered: surveillance footage, signatures, timestamps, teller statements. Thomas reviewed it all with the eyes of someone who'd seen plenty of families break in worse ways. "You'll need to file a report," he said, "and we'll need to secure what's left of your assets. Today." So I signed the papers. I gave him temporary financial control. I agreed to freeze the remaining accounts, and when I got home, I sat on the floor of my closet and cried until there was nothing left in me. Because love, real love, sometimes demands we protect ourselves from the very people we used to protect. And that was the moment I let go of the illusion that she might come back and say she was sorry. The paperwork was done. The accounts were frozen. The police report filed. But there are losses that don't show up on balance sheets. Emily stopped texting. I suppose I should have expected that. The silence from her was sharp. Not the ache of absence, but the coldness of knowing she had moved on without remorse. Michael didn't call for nearly a week. When he finally did, his voice was strained. "Mom, what the hell is going on? Emily said you filed a police report, that you're accusing her of stealing." I explained everything, calmly, factually. I told him about the forged check, the surveillance footage, the false paperwork. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "She's your granddaughter." "Yes," I said, "and I'm her grandmother, not her victim." He didn't respond. That was the cost. Not just Emily's betrayal, but the ripple it sent through what remained of our family. I knew I'd lose them both, or at least the version of them I'd known. I'd lit the match by telling the truth. At church, people smiled at me too kindly. Word travels fast in small towns. I heard my name whispered in the grocery store aisle. The librarian I used to volunteer with gave me a wide berth. No one said anything cruel, but kindness itself had become its own form of judgment. It was the loneliness that surprised me most. Not the physical kind, I'd lived alone for years, but the emotional kind, the bone-deep silence of walking through rooms filled with memories and wondering if they belonged to someone else now. And yet, even in that stillness, I knew I had done the right thing, because sometimes standing up for yourself feels like being buried before the resurrection, and I wasn't done yet. I was just beginning to rise. It was a letter that changed everything. Not from Emily, not from Michael, not even from the police. It came from the Office of Adult Protective Services, a cream envelope with official lettering and the weight of something ominous inside. It arrived 2 weeks after I filed the report, tucked among utility bills and pharmacy flyers. "Dear Ms. Caldwell," it read, "we have received an anonymous tip expressing concern about your mental capacity and personal financial decisions. An investigation has been opened. A representative will be in contact within 10 business days." My vision tunneled. The room swayed. Someone, likely Emily, had turned the tables. The paperwork she'd forged, the narrative she had built. It was being weaponized now to suggest that I was the threat to myself. I sat in my kitchen for hours, staring at that letter. All I could hear was Emily's voice. "You're just confused, Grandma. Are you sure you're remembering things right?" I had built a life on clarity, as a teacher, as a wife, as a mother. And now, that clarity was under assault. Not by bullets or fists, but by whispers dressed in bureaucracy. That night, I called Kevin. "I need everything," I told him. "Every camera angle, every signature sample, every teller's statement. If it's on file, I want it." He didn't hesitate. "You'll have it tomorrow." I also called Thomas. We arranged for a third-party medical evaluation, a psychiatric clearance, a notarized letter affirming my cognitive health. If they wanted to test me, I'd show them who they were dealing with. Because that letter wasn't just a threat. It was an alarm bell, a line in the sand. They weren't just trying to steal from me, they were trying to bury me, and I had just begun to sharpen my shovel. The next morning, I opened the curtains. It wasn't symbolic. It was survival. Sunlight filled the room. I brewed strong black tea, sat down with a legal pad, and started writing. Not a letter, not a journal, a plan, step by step, piece by piece, name by name. I wrote down everything I remembered. Dates, conversations, Emily's exact words. I copied account numbers, traced phone call logs, pulled medical records, old wills, deeds. I began building a case not just for the authorities, but for myself. Because this wasn't just about proving a forgery. It was about reclaiming the narrative. Too many women my age are made to feel like we're fading, like our voices are echoes, not declarations. But I still had my mind. I still had my spine. And now, I had a reason to use both. Kevin dropped off a USB drive with the security footage in person. He stayed for tea. We talked about his family, his promotion, the time I caught him cheating off Melissa Grant's test in 11th grade, and made him rewrite it from memory. "You were tough," he said, "but fair." "I was preparing you for moments like this," I said. "Turns out, I was preparing me too." When he left, he shook my hand like I was an equal, not a victim, not a fragile woman on the edge of decline. That night, I signed the retainer for a civil attorney, a woman named Simone, younger than Emily but with fire in her eyes. She didn't ask if I was sure. She just said, "Let's get to work." I smiled, because I wasn't just defending my money. I was defending my name, and I had just remembered who I was. Patricia Caldwell, teacher, widow, grandmother, and now, survivor. The reckoning had begun. Simone worked quickly. By the end of the week, she had pulled Emily's financial records through legal channels. What we found stunned me. Not just the boldness, but the pattern. Multiple large deposits scattered among 3 separate accounts. Transfers to a digital currency wallet. A sudden lease signed on a luxury apartment in a neighboring city. All within days of the forged check. "She wasn't desperate," Simone said, flipping through the statements. "She was planning a new life, without you in it." It shouldn't have shocked me, but it did. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd still been holding on to the idea that this was a cry for help, that Emily had made a mistake she didn't know how to undo. But no, she'd been building something, with my money, with my name. I spent the next morning combing through old emails and text threads, finding small but telling messages, her asking about my banking passwords, offering to help organize my online accounts. Things I'd brushed off at the time. Simone added them to the file. We met again with Thomas and updated him. He shook his head slowly. "We'll file for injunctive relief," he said. "She won't be able to touch a penny more. But Patricia, this might get ugly." I nodded. It already is. What struck me most in those days wasn't the legal work or the paperwork. It was how clear the air had become. No more guessing, No more wondering if I was losing my mind. The truth, however ugly, had finally taken form, and that truth gave me strength. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to prove, to everyone watching, including myself, that I had not disappeared. I was still here, and I was not done. The weapon she used against me, the checkbook, the signatures, the documents, they weren't just convenient. They were familiar. I had given her access over time, little things. I'd asked her to drop off payments at the post office. I let her write out grocery checks when my arthritis flared up. I showed her where I kept my folder of financial documents in case something ever happened. I'd armed her, and she'd taken those small, trusting gestures and built a fraud out of them. Simone called it opportunistic grooming, a slow manipulation of routine access to create an environment where trust could be exploited without raising alarm. She didn't just forge a check, Simone said. She studied your habits. She rehearsed this. I spent that afternoon digging through the fireproof box in my closet, the one Robert and I had always used to store important papers. In it, I found copies of my old power of attorney forms, unsigned. But one sheet caught my eye. It looked almost identical to the template Thomas had drawn up for us years ago, but this one was signed with my name, except I hadn't signed it. I brought it to Simone. Her eyes narrowed. She used this to open access to the accounts, she said. It's not notarized, it's not legally binding, but to an overworked banker, it's good enough to raise doubt. A forgery of a legal document, another layer in Emily's campaign. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, not from shame, but from clarity. I'd taught my students about paper trails, how history is written not just in wars and speeches, but in letters, contracts, and ledgers. And now I saw my life as a trail too. But this time, I wasn't just the teacher. I was the archivist, the investigator, the one writing the final version of events, and I would not let her be the author of my story. It was time to stop working in the shadows. Simone and Thomas both agreed. It was time to confront the system directly, not with emotion, not with accusations, with evidence. So I made the first official call. The phone rang 4 times before a clipped voice answered. Adult Protective Services, this is Marla. I introduced myself. I told her I'd received a notice of investigation. There was a pause. Yes, ma'am. That case was opened after a concern was submitted anonymously regarding potential cognitive decline and financial mismanagement. I took a breath. I have evidence that the claim was made maliciously by the same person who stole over $50,000 from me through a forged check. Another pause. Then the sound of typing. I see that a report was recently filed. Yes, I see the documents here. Surveillance video, a handwriting comparison, and a forensic affidavit from your attorney. That does change the framing of this case. I want to cooperate fully, I said, but I also want to ensure that this doesn't become a tool for further abuse. Her tone shifted, warmer. We're here to protect people like you, Ms. Caldwell, not to disempower them. When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt measured, like someone who had taken a single step out of a long, dark hallway. Simone called a few minutes later. You did well, she said. They'll reclassify the case. It'll stay open, but now it's flagged as a counter-investigation. Emily can't use it against you anymore. I hung up the phone and exhaled. I didn't dance. I didn't cry. I just made myself a fresh cup of tea. Then I opened my laptop. Because the next call wasn't going to be a defense. It was going to be an offense. To the credit bureau, to the district attorney, to the family Emily never imagined I'd have the strength to shame. The hardest part wasn't filing the lawsuit. It was walking into the courthouse. The floors were polished marble, the air cold and too quiet. I clutched my folder to my chest, just like I used to hold my gradebook. The security guard asked if I needed directions. I smiled politely, but my hands were trembling. Simone met me at the double doors to the clerk's office. "This is just paperwork," she whispered. "The real fight is still ahead. But today we plant the flag." We filed for fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. Thomas added civil counts for damages and negligence against the bank, pending further review. "You've got a clean record," he said. "You've been sharp, consistent. Her case relies entirely on pretending you weren't." I signed every page with a steady hand. Back at home, I updated my will. I removed Emily's name. That night, I opened the hope chest in my bedroom, the one where I kept my wedding dress, old love letters, and a bundle of report cards from decades of teaching. I pulled out a stack of essays from students who had thanked me in the margins, in loops of ink and adolescent honesty. Kevin had been one of them. His essay was still there. On the Vietnam War, B-. I had written, "You have more insight than you realize. Rewrite this. Don't waste your voice." I smiled, because now I was doing the same. I wasn't rewriting history. I was preserving it. On my terms. Simone emailed me the docket number and the court schedule. We had a preliminary hearing date. When I told Kevin, he said, "I'll testify if you need me." And I believed him. Because sometimes the seeds you plant as a teacher don't bloom until much later, when you're not leading a classroom, but standing alone in a fight for your name. And that's when you realize you're not alone at all. The next step was locking the gates. Thomas and Simone worked with a financial advisor, a no-nonsense woman named Danielle, who treated my retirement like it was Fort Knox. She was brisk, methodical, and utterly unshakable. "We're going to build a wall around what's left," she told me. "Then we're going to find out what else they touched." She helped me move all remaining funds into a secured living trust with multiple layers of access protection. Everything was password protected, legally shielded, and backed by biometric confirmation. My utilities, pension, and medical payments were rerouted to a new account. We pulled credit reports from all 3 bureaus. There were inquiries I didn't recognize, credit card applications, a personal loan, and a luxury car lease that had been denied, all within the last 60 days. "Emily was trying to build a new financial identity," Danielle said, "and she was using yours as the blueprint." She helped me file disputes, lock down my credit, and initiate fraud alerts. We created a timeline, a trail of digital footprints. I watched as the fortress grew around me, line by line, form by form. But it wasn't just protection, it was reclamation. Each document I signed was a declaration. I am here, I am capable, I am not disposable. Kevin checked in weekly. "Still good on your end?" he asked. "Better than good," I said. "I'm building something she can't take." Danielle raised a glass of sparkling water when we finalized the last document. "You've done more in 3 weeks than most people do in 3 years," she said. "You're not just surviving, Patricia. You're fortifying." And I believed her, because the fortress wasn't just made of accounts and locks, it was made of my resolve. And now it was impenetrable. By the time the court date was a week away, I had everything in order. Simone prepped me every afternoon. We sat in my dining room, the same place Emily once made cookies and practiced spelling words. And we rehearsed my testimony. "Keep it simple," Simone would say. "Stick to facts. You don't have to convince them you were hurt. You only have to show how she did it." I practiced my timeline. I memorized the forged signature line. I studied my own handwriting until it felt like armor. I reviewed statements from bank tellers, emails from Emily, security camera snapshots where her eyes were visible just beneath the mask. The truth was all there. I just had to deliver it. Thomas coordinated with a forensic handwriting expert. Danielle finalized the affidavits and fraud statements. Kevin prepared his own declaration, detailing how he recognized the fraud and the role my reputation as his teacher played in why he refused to look the other way. It moved me more than I expected. That 1 B- I gave him all those years ago had echoed back as a shield. At night, I sat in the living room with the windows open, the breeze whispering through the curtains. I stopped replaying Emily's voice in my head. I stopped wondering what she'd say when confronted. That wasn't my burden anymore. Let the facts speak. Let the trail of evidence hold the weight. My job was to walk in there with my head high, not to win her back, not to punish her, but to remind the world and myself that I had not disappeared. She had tried to make me a ghost, but I was walking into that courtroom flesh and blood, voice and truth, spine and storm, and I was ready. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before dawn. I made tea. I dressed in a navy suit I hadn't worn since Robert's memorial. I pinned my hair back and chose a pair of pearl earrings, a gift from my students the year I retired. As I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a frail old woman. I saw someone who had endured. Thomas picked me up at 8 sharp. Simone was already at the courthouse. The ride was quiet, respectful. No pep talks, no reassurances, just the quiet understanding that what came next would change everything. Emily was already in the courtroom when I arrived. She sat with her arms crossed, flanked by a lawyer I didn't recognize. She didn't look at me, not once. I felt something unexpected. Not rage, not sadness, pity. She had built her life on lies, and now she was trapped in them. The judge entered. The bailiff called the case, and just like that, we began. Simone moved with precision. She presented documents, played surveillance footage, entered bank records into evidence. Kevin's written statement was read aloud. Danielle's forensic timeline was submitted. Then it was my turn. I stood. I told them everything. Calmly, truthfully. I spoke not as a wounded grandmother, but as a witness to a quiet crime that had nearly erased a lifetime of dignity. I didn't cry. When I sat down, I caught Emily looking at me for the first time. Her eyes weren't angry. They were lost. The judge called for a recess. The courtroom emptied. Simone leaned over. You did it, no matter what happens next. You were heard. And I believed her, because whatever the court decided, whatever sentence was handed down, something irreversible had already occurred. I had stepped out of the shadow, and Emily could no longer pretend I wasn't standing there, fully seen, fully whole, unbroken. It started with the voicemail. Emily's voice tight and shaky. Grandma, can we talk? Please? I think we've both made mistakes. I just need to explain. Please call me back. I didn't return the call. The next day, a letter arrived. Handwritten, messy. She had never been much of a writer. I didn't mean to hurt you, she wrote. I just got scared. I thought maybe one day you'd forgive me. There was no apology. No mention of the forged check, the fake documents, the account tampering. Just vague sorrow wrapped in self-pity. Simone read it and shook her head. She's not sorry. She's afraid. By week's end, the civil case had made the local news. A small headline in the regional paper. Retired teacher fights financial fraud by family member. My name was mentioned only once, but it was enough. My phone rang all day. Friends, former students, even a few neighbors who had kept their distance since the whispers began. You're brave, one woman said. I wish I'd done the same when it happened to my father. Meanwhile, Emily's life began to fray. The apartment complex she had moved into, with my money, revoked her lease citing fraud-related scrutiny. Her social media accounts went silent. Her employer was contacted during a routine verification, and though Simone advised me not to dig, the whispers came anyway. She was escorted out of the office, someone said. She didn't even clear her desk. I didn't take joy in it, but I also didn't flinch. She had set this in motion, and now the dominoes were falling. Not because I pushed them, but because lies, when stacked high enough, always collapse under their own weight. Michael showed up unannounced. It was the first time I'd seen my son in person in over a month. He stood on my porch like a man with something to say, but no idea how to say it. I read the article, he said. I opened the door wider but didn't invite him in. "Then you know what she did." He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't know it was that bad, Mom. She told me you were exaggerating, that she was just helping you with bills, that maybe your memory—" I held up a hand. "Stop. I don't want to hear what she told you. I want to know what you believed." He hesitated. That was answer enough. "I wanted to believe she wouldn't do something like that," he said quietly, "that you were just confused." I nodded. It's easier to believe a lie when it's more convenient than the truth. He looked down. "What happens next?" "The court decides," I said, "but my part's done. I've said what needed saying." "I never wanted to choose sides," he murmured. "You didn't have to. You chose silence." He blinked, stunned. "I came here to make it right." "Then start by listening," I said. "Not defending, not minimizing, listening." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. He finally nodded. "I'm sorry." "Not to me," I said. "To yourself, for not standing up when it counted." He left without asking to come inside. That night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, the kind of tired that comes from holding up your own name against people who were supposed to carry it with you. Simone called later. "Just a warning. Emily's lawyer filed a motion to delay. They're scrambling." "Let them," I said. "They're not ready, but I am." Because the court wasn't the only place the truth would stand. It had already come home. And I was done accepting apologies that came only after the damage was public. The first true confrontation happened not in court, but in the grocery store. I was reaching for a can of crushed tomatoes when I heard, "Grandma?" I turned. Emily stood there, holding a basket of frozen dinners and sparkling water. No makeup, hair pulled into a rushed ponytail. She looked smaller somehow. We stared at each other across the soup aisle like strangers. And in that moment, that's exactly what we were. "I didn't think I'd run into you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I live here," I replied. "You knew that." She stepped closer. "I just wanted to talk. I feel like everything's gotten so twisted. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, cutting her off. "You took what didn't belong to you, and when I questioned it, you tried to make me doubt my own mind." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just kept my gaze steady. "You used to ask me why people committed treason. Remember that? In my class?" She nodded slowly. I continued. "I told you it was never just about money or power. It was about betrayal, about believing that your own gain mattered more than someone else's trust." "I didn't mean to." "You did," I said. "You meant to. You planned it. And now you want sympathy because it didn't go your way." Other shoppers passed us, oblivious. It felt surreal that something so life-shattering could happen beside a stack of discounted pasta. She dropped her eyes. "Do you hate me?" I paused. "No, I grieve for you, but I love myself more than I love the version of you that let this happen." She swallowed hard. "Will you ever forgive me?" I took my can and placed it gently into the cart. "That's not your question to ask," I said. "It's mine to decide, and I'm not there yet." I walked away. Not angry, not broken, just done. It didn't happen all at once, but it was swift. 2 days after the grocery store, Emily's lawyer formally withdrew from the case. No explanation on record, but Simone raised an eyebrow when she read the notice. She probably lied to him too. That same afternoon, Thomas got a call from a reporter. The story had reached a regional news station. They wanted a comment from Patricia Caldwell, not just the woman in the article, the woman in the courtroom. We declined. Let the evidence speak. Emily tried to hire a new attorney, but the legal aid office turned her down after reviewing the financial misconduct. No one wanted their name tied to a case with her paper trail. Then the district attorney's office opened a formal criminal investigation. Simone called me late at night. "You've got momentum now. They're taking this seriously. Real charges, real consequences." I sat at my kitchen table, tracing the rim of a teacup. "I never wanted it to get this far." "I know," she said, "but she chose this path. You're just holding up a mirror." Emily's bank accounts were frozen. Her credit score dropped by nearly 200 points. A summons was issued to appear in criminal court, a separate process from the civil suit. Michael called again, this time sounding panicked. "Can't we make this go away? She's your granddaughter. This could ruin her." "She did that," I said. "You're not the same, Mom. You've changed." "No," I replied. "I've just stopped hiding it." The truth had burned through every illusion, that we were a happy family, that loyalty trumped accountability, that age meant weakness. There were no more masks, just the scorched ground where a lie had lived too long. And me, standing in the ashes, not as a victim, but as a woman who refused to go quietly. The implosion had arrived, and I was still standing. Desperation has a smell to it, sour, urgent, clinging. It arrived in the form of a surprise knock on my door just before dusk. I looked through the window and saw Emily standing alone, hair disheveled, eyes rimmed red. I didn't open the door. She knocked again, louder, then pressed her forehead to the glass. "Please," she said, her voice cracked. "Grandma, just talk to me. Please." I stayed silent. She stepped back and started pacing the porch. "You don't understand what they're going to do to me. They're talking jail. Do you want that? Do you really want me locked up?" Still, I said nothing. "You raised me!" she shouted suddenly. "You're supposed to protect me." My hand tightened on the back of a chair. She fell quiet again, her voice lowered to a whimper. "I made a mistake. I panicked. I just thought, if I could get ahead a little, I'd pay it back. I never wanted it to go this far." But it had, and I'd seen what she'd done when she thought no one would catch her. She pulled out her phone. "I'll post an apology, a statement, whatever you want. Just tell them to stop, please." I walked to the door, opened it just a crack. Her eyes lit up. "Grandma, this isn't about punishment," I said quietly. "It's about accountability. You made your choices. Now you live with them." She opened her mouth again, but I closed the door before she could speak. Outside, she stood still for a moment longer. Then she left. No apology, no acceptance, just the fading sound of her footsteps down the walkway. I locked the door, not in anger, not in fear, but because some boundaries once crossed are never rebuilt. And I had finally learned the difference between saving someone and saving myself. The court ruled in my favor. It wasn't dramatic. There was no gasping from the gallery, just the sound of the judge's gavel and the cold, clear language of restitution and judgment. Emily was ordered to repay the full amount, $52,000, plus penalties. Her assets were frozen, wage garnishments approved, civil damages upheld, but there was no money left. She had drained what she could, spent it on status, on things that evaporated the moment she was asked to account for them. The apartment was gone, the car repossessed, creditors swirled around her like vultures. Michael called again. "She's broke, Mom. She's living with a friend. She's scared." "I was scared too," I said. He sighed. "Can't you find it in your heart to forgive her?" "I have," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't cancel consequences. That's not how life works. That's not what I taught either of you." For a time, I heard whispers of her working 2 jobs, late shifts, cleaning offices, trying to rebuild what she shattered. She never sent another letter. Thomas told me I could pursue criminal charges. Simone supported it. But I declined. I didn't want a trial that would drag on. I didn't want to sit through days of arguments that questioned my memory or character. I already knew the truth. Let the court record carry the rest. Danielle helped close out the restitution filing. "We'll keep a lien in place," she said. "If she ever inherits anything or wins the lottery, you'll be first in line." I laughed at that, a short, tired sound. But beneath the fatigue, I felt whole, not rich, not vindicated, but restored. She had tried to bankrupt me, but she had only emptied her own soul. And I was still standing, balance intact, in my accounts and in my heart. In small towns, news travels fast, but shame travels faster. After the court ruling, the whispers that once circled me now turned toward Emily. Her friends stopped responding to her social media posts. Church members avoided her at services. The boutique where she'd worked part-time let her go to avoid disruption. People who once cooed over her in the grocery line now turned their carts the other way. I didn't revel in it, but I also didn't intervene. There are lessons that only silence can teach. A former student of mine, now the principal at the high school, stopped me outside the library. "I read about what happened," he said. "People are talking, and they're not talking about you like a victim. They're talking about you like a damn hero." I smiled. "I didn't do anything special. I just told the truth." "Exactly," he said. "That's rare." Emily's name started disappearing. From event flyers, alumni bulletins, donor lists. It wasn't formal erasure. It was quiet omission, a community's way of closing ranks. One afternoon, I saw her at the pharmacy. She looked at me, not with anger, not with regret, but with exhaustion, as if carrying the weight of what she'd done had finally bent her back. I nodded. She looked down, and we both moved on. Michael visited less and less. I think he didn't know who to be loyal to anymore. That was fine. I had chosen my loyalty. I had chosen myself. And as the dust settled, I realized something. She hadn't just lost her money. She had lost her place. Because betrayal doesn't just empty a bank account. It empties the space where trust used to live. And in a town like this, trust is the only currency that matters. By autumn, the storm had passed. No more hearings, no more motions, no more phone calls from reporters or lawyers or banks. The house was quiet again, the way it had been before all of it. But it wasn't the same. Neither was I. The porch swing creaked under me one chilly evening as I watched the maple trees turn orange. I sipped tea and listened to the wind comb through the dry leaves. It was peaceful, but it was not without ache. Emily was gone, not just from my life, but from the town. A friend at the library mentioned she'd moved 2 counties over. No forwarding address, no apology. Michael still sent cards. They were always polite, never personal. And though I had won, though I had rebuilt what she tried to destroy, there was an emptiness that lingered. A hollow room in the heart that echoes differently when someone you raised turns into a stranger. Grief without a funeral. Some nights I found myself setting 2 cups of tea on the counter, out of habit, one for me, one for Emily. Then I'd quietly pour the second one down the drain. This, I realized, was the final phase of betrayal. Not the theft, not the trial, not the silence, but the solitude that comes after you've defended yourself. And there's no one left on the other side. Yet even in that loneliness, there was power, because I had chosen to face it, not mask it, not numb it, and that meant I had survived something many don't, the loss of someone you love without the comfort of death to close the door. Just absence, just space. And in that space, I began to build something new, quietly, slowly, but entirely mine. It started with a walk, nothing special. Just down the street, past the old oak tree where the kids used to hang tire swings, past the empty lot where the farmer's market sets up in summer. The air was crisp. My coat was buttoned tight, but my pace was steady. For months, I had moved like someone preparing for battle, shoulders tense, eyes always scanning for what might come next. But now, for the first time in a long while, I walked just to walk. No court date circled on the calendar. No letters arriving with hidden threats, no shadows stretching into my mailbox. Just me, and the road beneath my feet. When I got home, I opened all the windows. The breeze carried the scent of drying leaves and chimney smoke. I played music while I cleaned. I lit a candle. I made a pie. Not for company, not for distraction, but because I wanted to. The phone rang once. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened. It was Simone. "Your name's been cleared," she said. "The last of the disputes were resolved. Your credits restored. No pending flags. No further actions required." I didn't cry, but I did sit down, and I whispered, "Thank you." Not to her, not even to myself, but to the stillness, the quiet reward of outlasting the chaos. That night I wrote a letter, to no one in particular, to myself maybe, to the woman I had been a year ago, scared, ashamed, unsure. "You didn't disappear," I wrote. "You endured. You stood when it would have been easier to shrink. You said no when everyone expected yes." And when I sealed it and tucked it into my hope chest, I realized what this was. Not a return, a beginning, the first breath after the storm, the first step to freedom. Healing isn't a single act. It's a series of small, brave choices. I started with mornings. Instead of coffee and silence, I brewed a pot of tea and sat on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, listening to the world stir awake. I began reading again, not legal documents, but novels, histories, letters from women who had also been underestimated and overruled. I cleaned out closets, physical and emotional, gave away what no longer fit, kept only what made me feel strong or soft or necessary. At first, the quiet was loud, but eventually it became company. I began volunteering twice a week at the Historical Society. I dusted archives, transcribed oral histories, spoke with young researchers who reminded me of students from long ago. It didn't pay a thing, but it gave me something far better: relevance. The people there didn't treat me like a relic. They listened. They asked questions. They took notes. One afternoon, a young woman named Janelle asked, "Were you always this composed?" I laughed. "Goodness, no. I just lived long enough to know which emotions are worth unpacking." In the evenings, I cooked. Not because I had to, but because I wanted the scent of rosemary or lemon, or toasted almonds to remind me that life is made of senses, not spreadsheets. This was the foundation I had lacked before. Not protection, but purpose. Not vigilance, but rhythm. And for the first time in years, I fell asleep not with fear, but with fullness. The smell of old paper does something to me. I don't know if it's the ink, the weight of history, or the way the pages whisper when you turn them, but it always brings me home. One afternoon, while reorganizing a shelf at the Historical Society, I found a box labeled unindexed. Inside were handwritten letters from local veterans spanning 4 wars. Most had never been cataloged. Some hadn't even been opened since they were donated. I sat down, put on gloves, and started reading. There was a letter from a young man in Vietnam to his mother, written on lined notebook paper. His penmanship was careful. He ended it with, "Don't worry, Ma. I still remember how you like your coffee." Another from a World War I soldier, describing the mud in the trenches as thicker than memory. I read until the sun dipped low and the room turned gold with late afternoon light. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of worry, out of inspiration. The next morning, I called Janelle. "What if we turned those letters into a community exhibit?" I asked. "With readings, historical context, maybe even student performances." She was silent for a beat, then said, "You should lead it." So I did. I spent the next few weeks writing copy, selecting letters, organizing volunteers. I gave lectures at the community center, helped local teens practice monologues based on the writings. The exhibit opened on a rainy Saturday, and people came in droves. Kevin showed up. So did Simone. And when I stood up to speak, I wasn't just a woman who had been betrayed. I was a storyteller, a bridge. I spoke about memory, about resilience, about how even the smallest voices, if preserved, become thunder in the right ears. Afterward, someone asked if I was a historian. No, I said, smiling, just someone who refused to be forgotten. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a letter. I wrote it on the same stationery I used when I used to send birthday cards to my students. Simple, lined, cream-colored. My handwriting had softened with age, but the words were steady. "Dear Michael," I began. Not my son, not dear family, just his name. "I hope you're well. I hope Emily is finding her way. I'm not writing to revisit the past. I'm writing because I wanted you to know I'm okay." I paused there. Let the silence shape the next sentences. I'm not the same woman I was. That version of me, quiet, afraid, endlessly accommodating, she no longer lives here. The house is the same, but I am not. I told him about the exhibit, the teens, the letters. I mentioned Janelle, Kevin, Simone, the names of the new roots I had grown, and I ended it with this. I still believe in second chances, but not in rewriting the past. I hope you understand the difference. I signed it with love, not bitterness, not sarcasm, just the truth. Weeks passed, no response. And then, one day, a small card arrived. It had a photo of a mountain range on the front. Inside, 3 lines. "I got your letter. Thank you for writing. I'm trying to be better." No return address. But maybe that wasn't the point. Not every bridge needs to be rebuilt. Sometimes it's enough to know it didn't burn entirely. A few weeks after the exhibit, I received an email from the local high school. "Would you be open to speaking to our senior class? We're starting a unit on oral histories, and your name came up. A lot." At first, I hesitated. Then I smiled. They didn't ask me to talk about fraud, or victimhood, or even justice. They wanted to hear from someone who had seen history not just in textbooks, but in family rooms, classrooms, and courtrooms. I prepared a short talk. Nothing fancy, just a few stories about resilience, about the importance of speaking truth, even when your voice shakes. When I walked into the auditorium, I didn't expect a standing ovation. I didn't get one. What I got was better. Dozens of students leaning forward, listening, some taking notes, some just holding still, like they knew the stories mattered. Afterward, a girl named Tasha came up to me. "My grandmother raised me," she said, "and I never really got to ask her what it was like. Listening to you. It felt like hearing her." She hugged me. I let her. That evening, I received a handwritten note in my mailbox. No stamp, just folded carefully and tucked in the slot. "Thank you for reminding me not to let pain be the end of my story." I kept it in the same chest as the other letters, not because it was about me, but because it reminded me why voices matter. Because when we speak, even after everything, someone else learns they can too. I always meant to write one last letter, to myself. Not the woman I am now. The woman I was when this all began. I found her again while cleaning out the attic, buried in a box of old lesson plans, coffee-stained notebooks, and student thank you cards. A photo of me and Michael when he was just 6. He had a bowl haircut and was missing his front teeth. I looked tired, but proud. I brought it downstairs and placed it on the kitchen table. Then I wrote, "Dear Patricia, you were right to love them. You were also right to expect more. It wasn't your fault. And it wasn't your weakness that made you vulnerable. It was your hope. Hope isn't foolish. You survived. You stood. You spoke. You still laugh. You still teach. You still wake up and choose the day. And one day you'll realize that everything they tried to erase, you reclaimed. In full. You are not a footnote. You are the story." I folded the letter and tucked it inside the frame behind the photograph. not to forget, but to remember how far I'd come. Somewhere along the way, the ache softened, not because I forgot, but because I let go. The garden bloomed early that spring. Tulips pushed through the thawed soil, stubborn and bright. I planted them years ago, never expecting they'd still return, just like me. Simone came by one afternoon with Emily. The girl stood quietly by the porch, holding a plate of cookies and a folded-up piece of paper. A drawing. It was of my house, with tulips in front and a woman in a rocking chair. I didn't ask who the woman was. I already knew. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. Instead, I asked Emily if she wanted to see the attic, the same attic where so much had been lost and so much rediscovered. She nodded. I led her up the stairs. She ran her fingers along the spines of old books, held up a tarnished magnifying glass, smiled at a faded photo of a class I once taught. "Was this you?" she asked. "It still is," I said. I watched her linger at the window, the light painting her hair gold, and I realized something. Peace doesn't mean the past disappears. It means it no longer owns you. It was quiet that evening. I sat on the porch, tea in hand, the scent of tulips sweet in the air. No headlines, no letters, no noise, just the sound of wind through new leaves, and the certainty that whatever comes next, I am ready.